we are going to talk about energetic / existential orgasms, as I like to call it. So we'll get started with clitoral orgasms. Clitoral orgasms are, as the name implies, an orgasm that happens at your clitoris. Your clitoris is part of your vulva. Okay, so let's get an understanding of female anatomy first. Your vagina is the internal canal. It is the internal part of your female gynecological anatomy. The outside is your vulva. It's your external genitalia, right? So, sorry, there's some bugs because there's going to be some bugs. So your vulva is going to be your inner labia, your outer labia, your clitoris, right? I don't have my clitoris model with me. I should have gotten it inside. I'm going to do a video like eventually on all of these different parts on their own so we can dive super deep into them. But for today, I also, by the way, there is like a cabin being built next door and you can kind of in the distance hear the music. You're just going to probably hear it because I am not going to wait for them to stop playing it. I'm just going to keep talking. So here we go. We're on FaceTime together. So another thing about the clitoris to understand is that what you see on the outside, this little visible part, is the glands of the clitoris. But underneath, there is this iceberg underneath that you don't see, which are the shaft of the clitoris, the legs, and the bulbs, right? So this little tiny part is just one part of the clitoris, right? So we can actually touch around these the labia, and you're actually touching the skin and the tissue over top of where the legs are and the bulbs are. And if you go to the bottom of the bulbs which kind of get closer to the entryway of the vagina, these are also where your Bartholin's or your arousal glands are located, which are the glands that secrete fluid for lubrication during sex, right? So from the work I've done with women, and myself included, if the majority of women will be able to have a clitoral orgasm easier than any other type of orgasm, most of the time. This is common. It is not always the case, and that's because, I mean, there's various reasons. One of the reasons is because women have unique pelvic neural networks, which means what each woman requires individually to experience specific types of pleasure and orgasm can really shift, whereas in male pelvic anatomy it tends to be more uniform. So I have definitely met some women who, for some reason, and this could be a pelvic network thing, it could also be related to a memory that's like, you know, one of their first memories of or experiences was having a specific type of orgasm, and they kind of like go back to that time and time again, right? So every once in a while I'll meet women who are like, I've never had a clitoral orgasm, but I can have cervical ones. Cervical ones are way less common to have. I think about 2% of women statistically have been able to have experienced them. So this is less common, but it does happen. There's wind. My tripod is like was like shaking a little. So yeah, and the other thing about the clitoris is this is kind of what so many of us only know about female pleasure, is this little part of our anatomy. But the thing is, our entire vulva and then the inside of our vagina up into our cervix has all of this beautiful, amazing tissue that when it's nourished, when it's touched, when it's massaged, will fill with fluid and oxygen and nutrients, and will get aroused, and we can have deeper pleasure and deeper orgasm. So yeah, when we see a lot of porn, it tends to be, one, a lot of it's very male-centric, but if it's not male-centric, it's very clit-centric, right? And with this, I say that if you're a woman who really struggles with pleasure in general, if that's you, then it's really great to start here. This is an amazing place to start. If you are someone who's like, I can have clitoral orgasms and I'm feeling bored and I'm feeling like there's more to it, then you might be someone who wants to start exploring other areas, right? There is, and I'll go into this as well, there is in like neo-tantra and sacred sexuality discussions, there is discussion where female clitoral orgasms and male ejaculation in general can be energetically depleting. This is a conversation that needs to be had with a lot of nuance, right? Because in some ways, if you're being totally controlled by your pleasure and you are having orgasm after orgasm after orgasm and you feel shittier afterwards, you feel like it suckier afterwards, then yeah, maybe it's time to explore elsewhere, right? Maybe your body is telling you, let's explore elsewhere. But if you're somebody who has never found it easy to experience orgasm, whether that's because of religious shame or trauma or whatever it is, then like go for that. And the last thing we ever want to do, and I say this as an intimacy coach, is to instill more shame into people, because one of the biggest blocks of pleasure is shame, right? And so what we really want to do is create less of it so that becomes less of a block toward pleasure and orgasm. And I can talk a little bit about it today of like what are the main reasons like women might struggle with pleasure and orgasm. I will definitely in the future do videos. I will do a video specifically on that topic because there's so much I could go into with this, but yeah, one of those things is shame. That was like kind of the point of what I was saying originally. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else I would like to say about the clitoris. I think the main thing is like if you struggle with pleasure in general, this is a beautiful place to start. If you're feeling like you have a lot of experience here, then just know there's so much more to your anatomy and your potential for pleasure, and with that, emotional regulation and spiritual awakening, because all of these are involved as well, and so we can start to look deeper into that. Now, the one thing I'll say about this, if you are somebody who has struggled with clitoral orgasms before, I would say what I've seen in women who struggle with clitoral orgasms generally is that there's a tightening, there's a holding, and just a lack of relaxation. And sometimes that might be because you don't feel safe with the person you're with. Sometimes it might be you don't feel safe or comfortable in your body. Sometimes it might be you've experienced trauma in the past, and therefore in the present that's coming up now, and it's a way that is making you struggle to experience that. So I would say that's one of the number one reasons, because this is generally, in comparison to other types of orgasms, the one that is going to be, it's a lot more physiological based. So with that, I mean, like, I'll say, like, I could be kind of thinking about something else that's like non-sexual related, but I can still stimulate this area and I'll be able to experience pleasure and orgasm there. Whereas something like, with my G-spot or my cervix, it might not be that way. And yeah, that's because what I'll say is, if we can think of these different areas of orgasms as like different portals or gateways, then this would be one of the first portals or gateways, and it would be known as a more physical portal, whereas G-spot would be more emotional and cervical would be more spiritual. So, and again, these are just fun conversations to have. When I say these things, it's never like, this is right, this is wrong. These are just like ways to explore that have really helped me and helped the women I work with as well. So the next one we will talk about is breast orgasms. And I have a special place in my heart for breast orgasms because these are the gateways to the heart, right? They lie over the heart. But I want to talk not even just about breast orgasm, but breast touching and sensuality and pleasure in general, because there's also a correlation with our like nipples and breasts being suckled with childbirth and a release of oxytocin in that in a big way for the baby and for the mother. And so this is something that can also come up with breast pleasure in general, whether it's with you or with a partner or partners. And this is really amazing because oxytocin is incredibly integral for female health and female hormones. I would say, like, in the past few years, we've seen a lot of talk online, especially with people like Andrew Huberman, who talk about how important dopamine is. And yes, dopamine is really important, but if dopamine is that important for men, oxytocin is that important for women. Males also have oxytocin, females also have dopamine. It's all important, but we need it more. We have it more. There is a connection between it and estrogen, which is all obviously this hormone that's incredibly important when it comes to ovulation and birth and how we feel and our libido and all of that, right? So when I do nervous system work, nervous system regulation, trauma work, intimacy work, I take into account in such a big way oxytocin release and oxytocin nourishment, because it is very integral for women. And so this is something that happens in a big way with nipple and breast play and stimulation. The other thing about it is that when we stimulate the breast and when we stimulate the clitoris, the same area of the brain lights up. I cannot think of the name of that area, something lobule, I don't know. It's the same area, which means that when you stimulate your breast, it is going to help you also have a more, it can help you come faster or have more pleasure in your clitoris simultaneously as well. So you can kind of think of your breast being a gateway into opening the clitoris as well. And when we think about orgasms, we don't want to think about them as they all feel the same, because they don't. Actually, a clitoral orgasm feels very different in my experience than any other type of pleasure and orgasm I have in my body. It is a lot more similar to male ejaculation, where if you can look at it like on a graph, it will kind of be this like peak and this fall, well, right after you get super sensitive. But other types of orgasm and other types of pleasure are not like that. Like when I experience pleasure in my vagina or any type of internal orgasm, it is not this peak and this fall. It's more of like this rise and this wave and this rise and this wave, and you kind of stay up. So I always say with women, like, don't go looking for one type of orgasm to feel the same as the other, because that is not how it works, to be honest. When I experience any type of pleasure in my boobs, and when I experience any type of orgasmic energy in my boobs, it feels like this very light, feathery sensation that kind of keeps reverberating out over and over and over again, almost like this echo that goes outside of me. And it feels very it's almost like with a clitoral orgasm, it's much more fiery, and then with breasts, it's like feels like pink and flowery, if that makes sense. If I'm like seeing it in my mind, like in the psychedelic eye of my mind and pussy. And yeah, there is definitely a connection here between the energy of the heart and the breast. So I do feel like even with women who have, you know, there is breast tenderness or breast hardness, I would often ask them, like, where is your heart? Where are you at in your relationship with grief? You know, why do you feel like you've had to close your heart, and why is that? And like going deep into that for things like that to happen. And also there's body image issues related. If somebody doesn't feel confident in that, in the way their boobs look, then it's going to have an effect on how they're able to relax into that, and our nervous system to feel safe to then go into those moments of pleasure, right? Okay, so we will go now into vaginal or G-spot. Okay, there is a, sorry, sometimes I'm like speaking as fast as my mind is going, and I'm like, I'm probably talking really fast. You probably can't watch this in 2 times speed. Okay, so what do I want to say here? When you hear discussion about a vaginal orgasm or an internal orgasm, that tends to be in these conversations interchangeable with a G-spot orgasm. I will say about this that this is true and this is not true, because the G-spot is this spot where if you put your finger an inch or so into your vagina and you feel on the top ridge or the posterior wall of your pelvic diaphragm, it's this rougher kind of spongier area. That's the G-spot. I will also make another video specifically on this, but there's a lot to know here. So yes, it is part of the vagina because the vagina is this entire canal, but there are other parts in the vaginal canal that we can touch and tend to that will then engorge and arouse and will all be a part of pleasure and orgasm and trance that isn't directly always just the G-spot, right? The other thing about the G-spot is G is short for the guy who discovered the G-spot. It was discovered many millennia before. So if you actually want to discuss, talk about the technical term, it's the urethral sponge, right? So I like this better because I sometimes I'll call it the goddess spot too, because I like G-spot being for that as well. But it is also the urethral sponge. There is also arguments now that the G-spot is not actually a spot, that it is just the internal part of the clitoris. This is true, and also it doesn't matter. Like, I will say, like, the clitoris is like the North Pole, and then the G-spot is the South Pole. So that means that just the way that the same area of the brain lights up when we're stimulating the breast as the clitoris, it also means that we can stimulate the clitoris and it will start to externally kind of warm up and soften the internal urethral sponge. So when we go and actually stimulate that with our hands, then it's going to be more ready or juicy, right? So yes, they are very connected. And again, it's like the portal of the breast goes to the clit. The portal of the clit goes into the vagina and the urethral sponge. And yeah, this is the area that is connected with squirting or female ejaculation. What I'll say about that is squirting is not interchangeable with a urethral sponge or G-spot orgasm. You can squirt and not have an orgasm. You can orgasm and not squirt. So generally when I'm with myself and with other women that I work with, if we're feeling into, I really want to feel pleasure in this area and I never have, or I'm struggling, like, I would say don't obsess over the idea of squirting, which I get it because it's really hot and sexy and it's been very sensationalized in porn, and there is something really sexy about it, but also there is so much that can happen without that happening too, right? What I will say about this area as opposed to the clitoris is that in most cases, I know for myself, I know for a lot of women I work with, it just takes more time, okay? Like what it often takes for a clitoral orgasm to happen is maybe a quarter to a half of what it tends to take with a G-spot orgasm or pleasure. And the other thing about this is that not only does it take more time, but it takes more of you. It takes more vulnerability or letting go from you. It takes more relaxing and trusting in your body from you. This is very close to the urethra, right? Which is where we pee from. So a lot of this is also the conversation of, is squirt pee? And like if I have to hold back because if I don't, then I'll pee. And no, actually you have to let go. So yes, you need to instead of pulling back on that sensation that I have to pee, you have to relax into it and surrender to, if it happens, for squirting or an orgasm or both to happen, right? The sun just went back behind the clouds. So that is what I'll say about that. But yes, the other thing that I find really important about that area is that and as we go deeper inside of us, you have to understand, as we touch ourselves deeper physically, we are touching ourselves deeper emotionally and spiritually, so it will take more surrender from us. It will take more time. It will take more convincing a bit of the body for us to go there. Most of the time, not always. You might be a girl who's like, hey, I have always been able to do this and that, but I couldn't do this. Or this is always my favorite spot. I never go anywhere else. That's great. Everybody's different, right? But I'm giving you the trends that I see. The other thing when I teach about this, because I teach a lot in my work about the different areas of our pelvis and our yoni, or this is the Sanskrit word for female gynecological anatomy. It translates to sacred temple. So I say that like each area is related to something, like a different emotional or spiritual lesson or passageway. So the breasts are the heart, their nourishment, because they are what fill with milk if we choose to be mothers in this lifetime, right? I say the clitoris is related to how we show up in the world, this external expression, because it's this external part of our genitalia that is very fiery and then falls, right? And so with the G-spot, it tends to be related to abundance, and that's because it is this part of us where, and yes, inside where the urethral sponges, we have these little glands called the Skene's glands that fill up with fluid, and that's what would release for female ejaculation. So it's like this also in Sanskrit, amrita, this fluid, this goddess nourishment that we then shower our lovers with, or ourselves, or our manifestations, or whatever we might want that to be, right? And it's also like if this is an area that the tissue or the sponge area feels a little bit like rough or painful, or you don't want to go there because it feels really uncomfortable, that could also be related to lessons in abundance, even just feeling into the abundance of life, the abundance of, you know, the wind blowing through my hair and the sun kissing my face. Like, are we connected to that abundance, and how can that be connected to this abundance in our pelvis? Yeah, lots here. Okay, so we will then go into the cervix. So the cervix is essentially, in medicalized terms, because the cervix has been very medicalized, but actually there's more to it. It's also a pleasure portal as well. This is something I really want to emphasize, and I tend to emphasize a lot when I am speaking with women about pleasure. But yes, it is the part that when we're going to the OBGYN and we're having a pap smear, they are checking the health of the cervix. They are checking the rate at which the cells are reproducing on your cervix. So if they are reproducing really slow, it might be something like cervical dysplasia or HPV, or a precursor to, hey, in the future you could have cancer, blah blah blah. This is also a topic for a different video. But that is just to understand that it's the entryway to the womb. It is the deepest part of our body that we can physically touch. That's a big thing, right? For a lot of women, this area might feel painful. It might feel so deep in that you can't even reach it, and that's because it's almost like the face of the cervix is like this little head of the turtle. I've seen with women, especially when I do yoni massage work, that if you start to allow your body to feel safe in these different somatic practices, it will start to almost like pop its head out a little bit more and more. It has a face, it has a little face of the cervix, and this face turns in and out, and it also goes up and down depending on which phase of our cycle we're at, right? Because if we are menstruating, it might be that our vaginal canal is lower, our cervix is sitting lower, and ovulation, it's higher and it's more open so that sperm can get through, right? So yes, again, this is the type of pleasure, this is the type of orgasm that a lot of women, most women aren't even aware that this is kind of an option, I would say. But I always say it is this part, this tends to be the area where if women come to me, or myself, I have experienced this many times, where they're like, oh, why am I crying after sex? Why am I crying after an orgasm? This is really normal, right? Because with women especially, but with males too, there is so much emotional regulation that happens through sex, through lovemaking, through intimacy. It's really so integral to emotional regulation for women. And so the cervix is a reflexology point of the heart. So a lot of times if there is maybe, you know, going about your everyday life, there are these emotions that aren't going to really feel safe to come out, but it's almost like through cervical stimulation, they get knocked out. They get like kind of pushed out, and you have no choice, and that's the beauty of it. And so to just let yourself feel that. So with cervical relationship, yes, it's about pleasure, but it's so much about emotion. It's so much heart. It's so much safety, right? And it's so much time. Like, so many women struggle with pleasure because we are living in this society that we don't ever slow down. We're always living by the biology of the type of male biology, right? We are on a monthly cycle, but we tend to live on this 24-hour cycle. It tends to be more about male biology, and so many of us too are coming from lineages of women who are chronically overworking, are chronic people pleasers, and so it gets to us and it's like, damn, why is it hard for me to slow down? Why is it hard for me to feel pleasure? Why do I feel so numb, etc., etc.? It's normal as a result of where you're coming from and the culture you were raised in, but it doesn't have to be that way. It can be sensual, it can be full of pleasure, it can be medicine, right? Pleasure is medicine. Orgasm is a psychedelic elixir, if you want it to be. Now, I always say, yeah, the cervix is the spiritual gateway because it's what opens up, it's what dilates for physical life for the spiritual babies to then come into the physical world, to come then earth side, right? So for me, this really works. I will say I have also been trained and studied a lot in regards to somatic intimacy, and for some people, when it comes to pleasure, this type of stuff doesn't interest you. That's okay. It might not be your area of turn on, it might not be your area of interest or kink or desire, and that's okay. For me, it's true. It rings very true. It feels very relevant, so I love to talk about it in my content, and if it sticks, it sticks. But my main point is, with this area, it requires so much safety. Sometimes it requires forgiveness of, moments of we've let other people in our body that it wasn't a full yes, but it didn't feel okay to say no. We didn't feel strong enough, or it hurt and we didn't say anything. Or it hurt and we ignored it because we were afraid. Forgiveness, right? Forgiveness, slowness, tenderness, and love. Opening communication with your pelvis. Opening communication with your body, because that is going to do so much for orgasm and pleasure and intimacy, right? I also always give the little... what do I want to say? I don't know what word I'm looking for, but to kind of start to differentiate so that we can widen our range of pleasure from just being in the bedroom to what is the difference for you between sensuality, pleasure, orgasm, and climax, and going even beyond trance. And that's for a different video. What can it be like to move beyond orgasm into this trance-like state in pleasure and in childbirth? Just teasing you with that right now. But these are different, and some can happen together, right? But we can be feeling very sensual without having an orgasm. We can be in an orgasmic state without actually having that abrupt climax where we stop right after. All of these can be differentiated, so this is another way that we can start to know our bodies better as well. So I ask you that question, maybe you can journal it. And then to continue to our last two, blended is very common for most women. It's a lot easier to experience an internal orgasm if they're also stimulating their breasts and their clitoris, etc. So it's basically being able to and utilizing this mutual stimulation for a blended orgasm. And I highly recommend this because, like I said, it's not like, oh, I suck at pleasure, so I need to touch my boobs while my man's penetrating me. No, this part of your body is connected to that part of your body, so it's going to make the experience that much more potent. So it's an amazing thing to do that I highly recommend. So that's what all there is to that, right? And then I also like to bring in energetic or what I like to call existential orgasms. I guess that could be differentiated a little, but this is sort of like being able to feel in your body the energy of orgasm without touch, right? And this could happen between you and another person. But I also feel, for me, when I've experienced states of what I call energetic or existential orgasm, it's through like deep presence and deep meditation. Like I am in the forest, I've been by myself, it's silent, I can hear the birds, and I just feel almost like my body, I don't know if disintegrate, but my body and then the tree next to me starts to feel the same. And I feel almost like the pulse of the divine and God as the sexual energy, right? We come from sexual energy. Sexual energy is what allows us to exist in this form right now. And so that is source, that is God, and feeling that through my body, which means for a lot of people, and they're like, well, what do I do if I want to be in a moment of celibacy, or I'm single or whatever? Like, how can I feel pleasure? And I'm like, girl, honey, let me tell you, there is so much pleasure beyond just the bedroom. Like, you don't even know. But I'm telling you right now, all of these are possible for you. But I also want to say this. This is what I really want to tell you too. It's really important, so listen up. It's okay if you cannot experience all of these. It's okay if you struggle with pleasure. I don't want you to learn about this and feel like, oh my God, I suck because this girl can probably do that and I can't. It's not a competition, and as soon as you make it a competition, what actually happens is you put yourself farther away from the potential of it happening because of that, right? There might be women who just always prefer a G-spot orgasm. There might be women who just like a clitoral orgasm, and that's what feels good for them, and that's okay. Okay? My invitation is just that if you are feeling curious and open-minded, or you're actually feeling like your desire is yearning you to somewhere else, listen to that yearn and know that there is this plethora, this universe of pleasure that is possible through play and exploration. And there's nothing more magnetizing, there's nothing more sexy, there's nothing more beautiful to others, to yourself, to the universe than that energy, right? That feminine energy, that's what it is. So that is what I have to say today. I had so much fun teaching this. Whatever questions you have, please ask them. And like I said, I want to do a video on each spot in particular because I could talk about this for so long. So thank you so much for watching. I love you for being here, and there is a free Awaken to Yoni Connection workshop that you can download in my bio right now. It's a 1-hour workshop that I go through even more in-depth anatomy and the spiritual compass of your yoni and female physiology-ish. So go download that, and I'll see you soon.